Hey everybody, this is Mike. Welcome back to the shop. Today's project is a project I'm doing for a friend at work. He just bought this third gen Camaro here fairly recently, and it's got a rear main leak. I believe it's an 81, low miles, has like 51,000, maybe just a little over 51,000 is change, I guess. Has a 305 engine in it. It's a non-restored original. It's in pretty good shape. Not seeing rust around a lot of the common areas. The paint's in decent shape. I mean, it's really, for what it is, it's a clean car. So I think the only thing the previous owner has done to it is headers and dual exhaust. Other than that, it's pretty much all OEM. I believe he said this was in a magazine a few years ago. The original owner had it in a book or a magazine or something. I can't remember exactly which one it was. He gave him the copy of all that stuff when he bought it. But for the most part, it's a pretty clean car. Sounds good, runs good. It just leaves its little dribbles once in a while. So he asked me if I would take a look at it and kind of go through it while I had it over here. So I think really the only thing on the agenda right now is the rear main and oil pan. And then, he's quite tall. I think he's like 6'6" or 6'6", something like that. So he wants me to see if I can come up with a way to move the seat back maybe a couple inches. So anyway, so I'm going to do that. We'll go ahead and get started on it, and I'll pop the hood and show you a couple things that you probably ought to check first, and then we'll get it up in the air, get fluids draining, and move on. All right, so first couple of things on this you want to look for is the fan. On this particular one has a smaller 4-bladed fan, so I think we're okay, but on the 5-bladed and especially the 7-bladed ones, you may have to remove the upper shroud. This one, like I said, I've got a good 3.5 to maybe 4 inches there before it hits, so I think I'm good there. The distributor cap is another area. This one is probably 3.5 inches from the top of the cowl, the lip on the top of the cowl, or excuse me, the firewall, and the actual firewall is probably 2.5 or so inches away. So, and it's going to be going up in an arc. So I think we're clear. I may pop that resistor, that connector right there out of the way. Let's see. Other areas you want to look for is motor mount bolts, because those have to come out. This one, luckily, that has the bolt on the passenger side going from the rear forward. So the nut is next. The nut is behind the fuel pump. I've had them to where the bolt comes in from the front going rear to the rear, and you have to pull the fuel pump. This one doesn't look like you have to do that. It's hard to tell in the back. I may have to pull the starter. I don't think I have to pull the header, but I may have to pull the starter. I will take a look at that when I get under there. But at least the bolt isn't coming out towards the fuel pump, and so that negates having to pull that fuel pump. Let's take a look at the other side. The other side shouldn't be an issue. Yeah, the other side shouldn't be an issue, and it's going from the front to the rear, so it should come out relatively easy. Hoses all have plenty of clearance. Fuel line has plenty of clearance. Heater hoses all have plenty of length in them. So again, you want to watch. The ground cable has plenty of clearance, but I'm gonna disconnect the battery here anyway. But anyway, everything looks good in that respect. So I'm going to go ahead and disconnect this battery and get it up in the air and start draining some fluids and see what we need to do underneath. So while the oil's draining, actually prior to that, I went ahead and give it a good once-over, because I don't like to just take somebody else's word on something that's what's leaking. Anyway, there is some oil, quite a bit of oil down underneath here, but there's also a little bit up above the on the bell housing. So I went up, I couldn't see anything really from the top side, but I shined a light up from between the headers and the bell housing there, and I could see a wire that they had, whoever had the valve covers off, there was a wire that was smashed and trapped between the head and the gasket on the rocker cover. So that could potentially be a leak. It was damp around there a little bit, so I went ahead and loosened the rocker cover, pulled the wire out. It was flat on a pancake, but it doesn't look like the insulation has been compromised. I'm going to go ahead and so I tightened the rocker cover back up. I hope it didn't deform the gasket enough to where it's going to leak, but we'll give that a try. And then another common area on these is the oil sending unit. So I went over and reached around and felt by the oil sending unit up on behind the distributor, and sure enough, it was a little wet around the base of it. So those two could potentially be leaks. The oil's draining. I pulled the filter off. Right now, I'm just removing the inspection cover because I want to look up. There's a lot of oil around the outside here, but I want to look up into the bell housing between the clutch and between the flywheel and the crank there, and see if there's oil up underneath there. That'll give me a little better idea on if it's rear main as well, or if it's all these other ones. As much oil as are underneath here, I don't think it's all coming from up top side. But like I said, I just don't like taking somebody else's word for something and changing parts. I want to verify it myself. All right, so starter motor's out of the way. This one wasn't the kind that has the cutout out of it and it slides down. So I had to pull the starter motor out to get it down. And it also looks like it's broken, so I'll have to weld that up right there before I put it back in. I'm sure that's a rattle. Okay, so with the starter motor out of the way, the inspection cover out of the way here, I can definitely see that right up around the crank, it's definitely leaking there. Not as bad as all this. I think we got some other issues here as well. But so next order of business is to get the pan off. So you're going to undo the corner ones, I believe, are 1/2 inch, the 4 corners, and then in the middle is 7/16 headed screws. So go ahead and remove all those. I'll probably leave 1 or 2 in on each side, and then I'm going to pull the motor mount bolts and raise the engine up. So I'm going to get to that point, and yeah, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get the pan loose, other than just a couple bolts. Okay, I got all but a couple of the oil pan bolts out. So now we're going to undo this motor mount bolt. Okay, here's the nut off of it. And there's the bolt out. I've got a little bit of pressure up on the front of the harmonic balancer. So let's do the passenger side now. There's the passenger side. Again, I just have a little bit of pressure on it and up on it, and the bolt there and that motor mount come right out. So let's raise the motor up now. Keeping an eye on the fan, which I can actually see right here, and it's actually clearing and pulling, because it's going up in an arc, it's pulling slightly back and away from the shroud. So I'm up to where the blades would about contact there, but again, because I've put the blades flat across and it's going up in a slight arc because of the transmission mount, it's pulling away. I'm clearing it by, if I was to guess, I'd probably say 3/8 of an inch maybe. And I'm up maybe 3 inches, two and a quarter, 2.5, about 2.5 inches right there. So I'm going to try that before I get too carried away. Last 4 bolts removed, 2 on each side, and had to use a heel bar up there and just kind of pry against the flange a little bit. You want to be very careful you don't bend the flange because you'll have to straighten it after. But then usually just walk it down a little bit, and it is tight, but it'll clear the bell housing and the front and the pans down. So next I will get the oil pump dropped, and then go in to start cleaning all the surfaces, the gasket surfaces here, and then lastly I'll do the rear main. Got a lot of this wiped down. I kind of hit it with some brake wash and wiped it all down. I've got the rails of the block there all cleaned. The gasket come off pretty decent. I run some brake wash on a rag soaked around it. I do need to, there's a couple areas where I can barely feel something, but I can't get it off with the gasket scraper, so I'll take and run around it with a little bit of Scotch-Brite or emery or something. But for right now, I'm going to pull the rear cap off because I don't, no sense in wasting time trying to clean the groove up in the engine when I can get it out and get it on the bench and do it easier. So the front around the timing cover, I got cleaned up really good. Like I said, both rails. So I'm just going to pop this cap down now and get ready to actually change the rear main. Okay. All right, so I left off, I disassembled everything. I've got the rear main off. I've been cleaning everything, getting ready to actually change the rear main and put everything back together. So for the time being, I popped the insert out of the rear cap just so that I could clean it really good. It had a little bit of, looked like aviation form of gasket, that brown, almost like an Indian shellac that you used to see years ago on it. So I just took some emery paper on a block and run over the end caps here. So there's the lower portion of the rear main that I popped loose. So like I say, this is all cleaned up. Oil pump, fasteners, everything's ready to go back together here. Let's go under the car now, and I'll show you how to replace the actual rear main. Before I do that, let me show you. Here is the new rear main. It comes with the little nylon bushing that connects the oil pump. Well, it actually doesn't connect it. It's more like a guide. It kind of snaps on between the intermediate shaft and the oil pump. So if we take, and one key thing I wanted to show you in this set. Now they also make an offset. If you have a crank that has high mileage on it, and around the journal, or yeah, around the not the bearing journal, but right behind it where the seal rides, if you can feel, and you run your fingernail across it, if you can feel anything across there, they do make what they call an offset rear main, and basically what it does is it shifts the sealing surface on the seal over so it rides on a new section of that crankshaft. So that is a possibility if you do have one. This does not display any of that wear characteristic, but there's one part I wanted to show you in here. This is a little nylon installation tool. This will become your friend when it goes to putting it back on, because what you do, and I'll show you as we get under there, but what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna be, and I hope this shows up underneath the car, but what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna be snaking that seal around the crankshaft, the upper half of the seal. So when we go to put the new one back in, let me see if it'll show up here. Maybe better than. When you go to push the new one around, this edge right here on the rear main is actually quite sharp because it's a machined surface. So what happens if you go to slide this in and around like so, you can shave off the inside of this seal as you're fishing it around that upper engine block. So this little tool aids, it's the exact width of that groove, and it aids in going down in between there. Now as you snake that seal around, this guide, you hold it with one hand while you fish the seal around, and it actually will protect that inner edge of that seal. So a couple other key points while I'm here is another thing I like to do is I like to take a little bit of Seal Glide. You can use motor oil, whatever. I just use Seal Glide and apply it to the sealing surface, the lip surface here, the seal. That helps so that it doesn't start up on a dry lip seal on the seal. And then the other thing, what was I going to say? Oh, make sure you use the tool, put a little lip seal on it, and then just push it around. And it usually pushes around by hand. Now, this is a little bit of controversy. Some people will argue this point. I've done it both ways, had success both ways. If you put the seal in to where it seals flat on both sides, you have a seal surface with the cap, and it's parallel with the seal surface on the seal. As you tighten this up, as you can see, I'm flush here, but it's protruding, just a slight little bit right there. I wouldn't say it's oversized, it's just not undersized, so that when that goes up to the block and mates the other half of the seal that is residing up inside, it preloads it, if you will, to where it'll push down on that seal and force these two sealing surfaces together. Now, and like I said, this is controversial. I've done them both ways, but what I like to do is just shift that. It doesn't have to be far, like a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch, so that it's high on one side, low on the other. That way you don't have the seal surface and the crankshafts and the cap surface on the same plane. Like I said, that's just something I do to help ward off a potential leak. I've done them both ways, had good luck both ways. Don't know if it makes that much of a difference. It's just what I do, and it doesn't. I mean, I've seen people on forums, they'll offset it 1/4, 3/8 of an inch. I don't think you want to do that. You want to just barely, just so those couple surfaces aren't on the same plane. And again, you don't necessarily have to do this. That's just something I've been doing for the last 30 years. And like I said, I've done a couple the other way just as experiments, and I haven't had any of them leak regardless. So the other thing that's what I was going to say is make sure when you're putting the seal in, there's a oil side and an atmospheric side. You want to look and make sure that that lip, that inverted lip, is back towards the inside of the engine, the crank, oil cavity, whatever you want to call it. If you put it on the other way, it will leak. It'll fit, but it will leak. So you want to make sure that that lip is open to the inside of the oil. Okay? All right, let's go into the car and change the upper half. Let's see. Hopefully this will show up now. I've went ahead and I've cleaned all the block thoroughly with, I mean, the gasket, the original, and I don't think this is the original. It looked like, it didn't look like original sealant. I think this pan's been off of this before, especially because, well, I'll take you over to the pan and show you after, but there's indications that this has been removed before. So that being said, the gasket come off fairly decent. They did use quite a bit of sealant at the corners, which you want to use a little bit, but it seemed excessive. And then there was a couple of areas where you couldn't really feel it, but I couldn't get any more off of the gasket scraper, and I don't like gouging the block, so I just took a little bit of like 320 emery and just kind of hit those couple of trouble spots. Basically, I think I was just knocking a little bit of residue from the gasket off. But if you don't get it clean, you'll be doing this job again. So it's easier to do it right the first time and clean it properly and not have to come back and do it again. So, besides, you don't make any money when you have to do it a second time. So that being said, let's go ahead and now, this also is where I may catch some criticism, but I've been doing it this way for 30 years. What you want to look for, and I hope this shows up, right here is where your upper half of your seal is. Now, again, I mentioned a minute ago, you want to run your fingernail across where that sealing surface is. You can see where it's all clean. I have no, what I would call excessive wear, really no wear at all. I can't feel it. I see a slight mark there, but that's where the seal's been riding. but I cannot feel anything with my fingernail. So I just picked up a standard rear main. I did not get the offset one. I don't think it's necessary, but I have used them and they do work. You just have to, they're a little more troublesome because you want to make sure, excuse me, you want to make sure that the new surface that the offset seal is going to be riding on is in fact clean and corrosion free and all that. So sometimes you'll end up turning the crankshaft over a couple times and maybe running some emery or some Scotch-Brite very lightly to make sure you get good clean metal for that new seal to ride, or it'll tear up a new seal. But this one's in good shape. So now they make what they call a rope kit. They make a couple other different tools. I've heard, and I've actually had to do this on one or two, if I remember right. The seal was pretty tight up in there, and I actually had to undo a couple of mains further ahead. I don't really like to disturb them if I don't have to. I'm going to try this one without. I would say I probably got a 90+% success rate of not having to undo anything more than just the rear main, but there have been a few over the years that I have undone further ahead mains to allow that crank to drop, I mean, thousandths of an inch, just enough to release some pressure on that seal. Now, here's where again, I may get some criticism. I don't care. I've been doing this for 30 years, and it's been successful for me, but you have to pay attention to what you're doing, or you will damage that surface and create a leak. So right where that seal rides, you can see the lip of the seal. You want to use, you can use brass if you want. Brass would be a good idea. I don't have one that fine. This is only an 1/8 inch diameter punch, but it's a long punch. Now, one key thing to remember is the very tip here does not have any burrs on it. I keep all my punches and chisels and everything really sharp and ready to go at any time, but if you don't, you'll definitely want to walk over to the grinder, flatten that end off, perfectly flat, and then either put a chamfer or just at least remove the burr, because you do not want to have any kind of like a mushroom like you'd get on the other end. That's another one of my pet peeves, by the way, is mushrooms on the end of punches. It drives me up a wall. So whenever you get those, make sure you knock them off. You don't want to have a piece come down into your hand or worse, your eye, and cause you some grief. So again, there's the end of the punch. Flattened off, deburred, because what happens if when you get up in there, you're going to be in some tight quarters, and if you get up there and you got a big old nasty burr hanging off the edge, there's a high probability you're going to mar the sealing surface where that seal rides. So you'll probably want to watch this side over here. This side's closest to me, and I don't want to block the camera, so I'm going to try to get up in there. Now, again, I'm not going to hit right where the surface is where the seal rides, because if, and I use that term if, or loosely, if you slip, you don't want to mar that surface. So I'm going to go kind of to the back side, and it's a steel seal, rubber coated. So it's not like you're just tapping on rubber. It does have some support there. So I go to the inside, and I actually use the flange where the thrust flange on the crank as a guide, so I'm not having to just kind of hold this and freehand it. So I use that as a little bit of a guide, and you want to just go miss the block, lightly tap. Oop, see one good tap, and it started to move. So now I'll go into the corner of the block and the seal and start tapping a little bit where I'm not even anywhere near that sealing surface. Once you get that working around, you can usually grab the seal like so, and it'll pull right around, easy peasy. Can't quite do it by hand. Okay, and there is the upper rear main out. So let me grab the new one with the installation tool, and we'll put the new one in. Oh, and I'll put a little bit of Seal Glide on it first. Got everything ready to go here. Got the seal with a little bit of Seal Glide and the mating surface for the crank, and have the installation tool. And let's see if this shows up here. So here is the two lips I was talking about. This side over here is exposed to the atmosphere. This side over here is the oil side. It's the bigger lip, so it cups it. So you want to make sure that that is facing properly. So it's going to go up there just like that. And here's the installation tool. We're going to put that, I'm going to try to do this without bumping the camera. We're going to put the installation tool right in that groove. Now I'm going to pull my hands back and see if it'll stay there. Okay, so there's the installation tool. Wipe my hands off here. And you can see that it's sitting in this groove that goes around where the crank is. That's machine groove in the crank, or excuse me, machine groove in the block that's going to go around. So I'm going to push it around, and it should move around by hand. Like I said, I've got a little bit of seal glide on the seal. It should move right around by hand. And I'll push it until I can feel it on the other side. Or actually what I'll do is I'll probably just push it to where I can go up to it. I can't push it anymore, and it'll probably be almost flush with the block. So I'm going to hold the tool with one hand, act as a guide. It's pushing around. Again, you mainly just don't want to shave off any of that rubber. And it's up. Okay, I can feel the crank, or the block. So it's right there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply pull the installation tool out. Easy peasy. Okay, so the upper portion is installed. Now I'm going to put a little bit of, probably a little bit of assembly lube on the crank here, and as well as put the bearing insert back in the cap. Put the cap on, and I'm going to offset. Like I said, I'm just going to push it up in there with my finger and offset. Actually, I'll use my screwdriver so maybe you can see what I'm doing. And it's not even 1/8 of an inch, probably 3/32 of an inch maybe is what I've got it offset. So I'll put the opposite in the cap, rear cap. I've got the seal offset ever so slightly. Again, don't have to do that. I just have found that I've had good luck, good success by doing that. So put a little assembly lube up on the journal. Put it down in the lower bearing. Rear cap's going up into place. Seal's offset to match the the upper one. I should also note that you want to make sure and have everything cleaned properly before you get to this point. That rear cap is a lot easier to clean that groove from the oil pan gasket. Much easier to do at this point than up in the chassis. So I just did that over on the bench while I had the cap lowered. Go ahead and take up the clearance. All right, now main bearings you generally want to torque in 3 steps. Where this one, I take that back. I was wrong on this torque. These are 75 foot-pounds. I just looked at my notes. 75 foot-pounds on 2-bolt mains on all of them. If it's a 4-bolt, the outer one is at 65 foot-pounds. So let me make that correction. 75 foot-pounds. So I'll do this in 3 increments. I'll go to 25 foot-pounds first. And I'll bump it up to 50. Then go to 75. Okay. Yeah, these aren't moving at all, so we're good there. Okay, I'm gonna grab the oil pump and get it installed while I'm right here, and then we'll move over to the pan. Now you want to kind of take note of when you took this out, the orientation of the intermediate shaft, so hopefully it'll go right back and engage with the distributor. Otherwise, you're going to be, it's not the end of the world, just be sticking your hand up in there and try to rotate it and match up the intermediate shaft with the distributor shaft. But I kind of made a mental note on this one. So now this one gets torqued to 65 foot-pounds. All right, so pretty much that bottom's buttoned up, seals replaced. Let's move over to the pan. I'll show you what needs to be done on that. Okay, now move over to the oil pan, and you want to make sure, get your gaskets and everything off of there. I use been using the one-piece Felpro gasket. Been having good luck with that. It comes with longer bolts, both the 1/4 inch and the 5/16. So, because the gasket is just ever so slightly thicker. But anyway, there's two on the front here, the front timing cover. There's two different seals. There's a thin and a thick. The thin one is your first generation. I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe it goes through till about 75, 76, somewhere in there. And then they take over and use the thicker one up into the, from mid 70s on up into the 80s. One way to tell is lay your pan on the sealing surface like this and measure this front lip here. And if it's 2 3/8, it's the thick seal. If it's 2 1/4, it's the thin seal. This one is actually just over 2 3/8, and that's because I believe I have some damaged holes here that we need to address next. But this one takes the thick gasket, and it's like there again, being an 81, I kind of assumed it would be, but so I took a chance, but I just wanted to measure it and make sure. Now, talking to the pan, get your oils, get your surfaces cleaned. This, like I said, this gasket come off with relative ease. And then I just had a little bit of, it's really hard. I'm pretty sure it's like the old Indian shellac that they used to use, or Permatex. I made one called an aviation forma gasket that was kind of brown in color and dried hard. I used it on some things back in the day, but not so much anymore. But that's kind of what I believe this had on it. So I don't believe this was, plus it had quite a bit, so I don't think this was original, but I think this pan had been off, especially when I see the bolt holes. What you want to look for, let me grab a straight edge and see if maybe that will help visualize it with a straight edge. I just got a 12-inch ruler here is all for now. But if you put that straight edge across there, you can see every one of those bolt holes. That tells me that that's been over torqued. And you can even tell with the original gasket, if you know what you're looking for, you can, I don't know if I've got any, hell's garbage came, I threw that away already. But you can see, because where every one of these were, the gasket had bulged out quite a bit. I mean, you're going to get a little bit of bulge when you're torquing these down. I think factory spec on these was like, on the 1/4 inch ones, about 7.5 foot-pounds, and on the 5/16 ones, it was 13.5. The new Felpros bumped that just a little bit, but that is because they have this steel insert in them, and you want to torque it down to that predetermined amount with those inserts to make sure you get the proper squish on the gasket. These are, I believe, I'll double check, but I think they're 8 foot-pounds on the 1/4 inch ones, and on the 4-corner 5/16 ones, they are 18 foot-pounds. But either way, you can tell this has been over torqued. So you want to make sure that those are all flush. There's a couple different ways you can go about it. You can get a body hammer and back up the underside somehow. That's what I've always found to be the best way. And boom, that one's fixed. Go to the next one. You can zoom in here and see if that'll show up any better. I don't know. So you can kind of see that one there. you can see how high each of these three are. So I'll just take, and I'm just using just a regular old body hammer. Boom. Pretty simple. Now, one thing, you got raised ribs, excuse me, between each of these bolt holes. You don't want to flatten those down. That's what actually kind of preloads that gasket between the fasteners. But if you lay that straight edge across there now, basically I'm touching each one of those raised ridge areas. Not that I hadn't done that one yet. So I'm touching in a 12-inch span there. I'm touching each one of those ribbed areas, and I'm not touching the bolt hole. Actually, I am on this one just a little bit. So we'll address that one. There we go. So now I'm touching all four, actually five of those, and the bolt holes are below them. So I'll go around and do the rest of the pan, and then we'll get ready to put the pan back up. All right, so along with the one-piece Felpro gasket, it also comes with new lock washers and bolts. So the original bolts measured about, I think these ones were, the 1/4-inch ones were 5/8. Yeah, those were 5/8. Excuse me, the 5/16 ones were 5/8. The 1/4-inch ones were about 7/16. So the new 5/16 ones are 3/4, and the 1/4-inch ones are 5/8. So that will compensate for a little bit thicker gasket. Also, they come with these little, I don't know what you call them, little standoffs, I guess, that you thread up in the four corners, and it captures the pan. I haven't had the best luck using these in a four-wheel drive truck. It haven't been too bad because there's usually enough clearance. But in the car, in the car chassis, I haven't had the best luck because it's already so close between the cross member and getting the back to clear the bell housing or the transmission. So let me show you a little trick that I use. Okay, so here's the pan gasket. There's the pan. Fits down in there. Again, you want to make sure that if you're trying to put the gasket down in and this is sticking up 1/4 of an inch or so above, and you're having to really force that down in there, you might have the wrong gasket. So measure it like I showed you a few minutes ago. But let me show you a little trick that I use rather than use those bolts. You can use, I've used fishing line before, but I'm not a fisherman, so I don't have fishing line kicking around. But I have had good luck with dental floss, and just take and put a few of these sections, a couple on each side, just tie a piece of dental floss around the gasket. Like so, and it will hold the gasket in place while you can position it up in the chassis. So this works really well. Then once you get close up in there, you just merely reach up underneath with a pair of dikes, cut it, pull the dental floss out. So I usually put that in, I don't know, 2 or 3 places on each side until I can shake the pan around a little bit and it doesn't move, and then it's ready to go up in. So again, you can use either dental floss, fishing line. I just grabbed some dental floss, and so I'll go ahead and get this prepped. And then the only two, this gasket goes on dry. The only 2 places you're going to put sealant is where the timing chain cover intersects the block, and back where the rear main cap intersects the block. And for that, I just generally use, I'm a fan of GM's ES engine sealant. So I'll just come up, I'll show you over there, but I'll just go in and I'll put a little bit up in the corner where that rear main cap meets the block and timing chain cover meets the block. And then we'll put the pan up in and start a few bolts and start buttoning up the pan.
Like previously discussed, we're just going to take and put a little bit of up in the 4 corners where the timing cover meets, as well as the rear main cap. So I just grabbed a little bit of my GMES here. And I've wiped everything down with some brake clean and prior, so we should just be able to go right to putting the pan on, and that's it. So got the 4 corners done. We got the pan. Got the pan tied, or the gasket tied onto the pan. I've got the 4 corners sealed. Now what you want to watch out for is you don't catch this on the crank journal and peel it back. So you want to make sure you just gently finesse it up into place. It's clearing. All right, so after a little finessing, I got the pan up in there, reached up in and just pulled the dental floss down, and I'm just going around and starting the bolts, the 5/16 bolts first, and just run them up in a few threads. Start in the middle and kind of work my way fore and aft. And then I'll hit the 4 corners. You want to make sure the gasket didn't slip inside anywhere, so you want to make sure you've got good exposure of the gasket all the way around. So I'm looking down the pan rail here, and I've got the same amount of gasket basically sticking through everywhere. Gonna move around, do those couple of front ones, and then we'll come back to the corner. All right, so just running around the last time here. And then I can button. All right, pan's torqued in place, and guess I probably ought to put the drain plug. Install the drain plug before I forget, and the oil filter, and then I got to go over and weld up this inspection cover that was broken. Right, so starter motor's installed, connected. The little wire, I'm not sure if it'll show up or not, but the clip retainer for the positive battery cable coming down the starter motor is installed. And I've got a little bit of anti-seize on the motor mount bolts, so I'm going to start lowering the engine down and install the motor mount bolts. And then underneath here is done. All right, so got everything buttoned up on the bottom, set it down. I also noticed when I was diagnosing it the first night I had this in here that the oil sending unit was damp all around it, when that's also a leak point on these things. Especially over time, the diaphragm inside gets hard and brittle and cracks and leaks, and this has got a pretty good pretty good film of oil around it. Plus, when I reach my hand down along the bottom, along the back of the manifold, and down onto the bell housing, it was a little damp down there. So for, I don't know what the hell are these sending units, $8, $10, yeah, something like that, $12.
it was worth go ahead and putting that in. So went ahead and buttoned that up. I just topped off the oil, so we're going to go ahead and fire it up now. There we go. Bounce it down, get it down off high idle, and all right, well, that pretty much concludes replacing a two-piece rear main on a small block Chevy in the car. So hope this was informative, and thanks for watching. Don't forget to click the like and subscribe button and stay tuned for more videos. Thank you.